just having a conversation about homelessness, and I know this is an issue that is important, very important to you. You've said this many times that you've been homeless or unhoused yourself before, and it's in the context of Anna Kasparia is in an interview with Ben Shapiro. It is framed as an interview of trying to come together, and all the radical left and the radical right, without them, and trying to come together with something. But they seem to have the same position on homelessness. And I just wanted to get your take on what she says. I'll rewind it maybe 45 seconds. Or maybe a little bit more. All right, so it's
been governed awfully. Forget about who's governing it.
Right.
The policies that have been used to govern it are just terrible. You have an increase in crime. Homelessness has taken over the streets. When I was living there, I mean, I've pretty famously talked about this. I mean, it was the kind of place where I had a very nice house in a pretty decent neighborhood, and we had a gate in the front. And we would open the gate, and there would be a homeless person face down in the gutter, Edgar Allan Poe style, or there would be a guy outside the house shooting heroin into his foot. And I've got like a 5-year-old. And this sort of stuff has become incredibly common in LA. You noticed it, and you've been getting all sorts of flack for it.
Right, because when there are problems in society, we need solutions. And you can't find solutions unless you acknowledge what the problem is and then properly diagnose it. So my biggest issue right now, at least with the way the left has handled the discussion on homelessness in places like Los Angeles, is there's this housing first mentality where, everything would be fine as long as we put everyone in housing. And by the way, let me just note, housing is an important component to this. There is a housing crisis. There's a lack of inventory. I think we all know that. We do need to build more housing. But at the same time, treating the homeless population as if it's a monolith has been a complete failure. There is a huge mental health crisis happening in this country. So people with severe mental health issues are just left to die on the streets. And in some cases, because they are experiencing an episode, they could carry out some sort of act of violence and assault someone. And it's a dangerous situation for everyone, okay? The people who are just trying to go about their day and the person who is left on the streets battling with this untreated mental health issue. There are people who are obviously struggling with drug addiction.
New, by the way. This is classic homeless fear mongering. Like, oh my God, the homeless commits crime. What Anna is doing? She thinks she's being. I'll pass to you, Jay, because I know you want to chime in. She thinks she's doing this intellectual lefty position. She's like, this is the position other people don't think about before. No, this is not new. Like the old school tactic of capitalists is to say that homeless. You know how Ben Shapiro mentioned the guy shooting heroin in his foot. What about the homeless children? What about the homeless people that are working? So they demonize and say all homeless people are druggies because once again, 40% homeless people are black, so it's easier to get away with those ridiculous tropes. But I can round this all day. Go ahead, JB. I want to get your take.
Okay, so they talk about the homeless guy shooting heroin in his foot. What about the rich guy that's snorting cocaine in his mansion? Oh, we don't want to talk about that because he's rich, right? Right? But we're concerned about the homeless guy shooting heroin in his foot. And here's the funny part a lot of people don't realize. Some people that are homeless don't get into drugs until they're homeless because they're trying to dull the pain because they actually are homeless. Some people don't get certain mental illnesses until they become homeless because that's what leads up into it. And then they start to have to deal with all the troubles of being homeless. So the saying of just give people homes, homeless people aren't a monolith. No, but humans need housing. They are human. See, this is the problem. Somebody like Anna Kasparian is basically making it out to sound like homeless people are human. All humans need housing, right? Hell, you can go out camping, and what do you see? Tents. Tents is a temporary housing. Even if you're just doing it for fun and you're going out to camp, you still give yourself housing. Even if somebody finds themselves out in the woods somewhere, what do? They build shelter in order for it to keep them safe from the elements. What makes you think that's not going to be any different? That being said, when you give people housing, then it starts to make a base for them in order to get away from the substance abuse, to get away from the perils of mental illness. So this is why giving people housing, a housing first model, actually works. In fact, wasn't it Finland that did it? And it's extremely successful? And please don't give me that, well, do you have a more homogenous population, is more smaller? You can do it state by state if you want to do it that way, because the state of Florida is probably smaller than Finland, so you can do it state by state. But the point is that, do you believe that people deserve housing as a human right? And if you don't, why don't you believe that? But the thing is, they don't want to answer that. Because then if you do that, then it goes, oh, well, I think we should put profits first. And then that makes them out to who they really are. But the problem is they don't want to answer that question. So they try to wiggle it in. Oh, well, these people do drugs. Rich people do drugs.
It's also a tactic where they bring up homeless drug use, despite the fact that they not all drug users, even they do use drug, who care, for one. They got to cope with life. Secondly, they try to make being homeless out as being a personal failure. And in this context, oh my God, these druggies are the ones who don't deserve homes. These druggies are the ones who don't deserve passion. So that shifts the conversation away from the structural, the failure of our system. Look at the druggie shooting heroin in his foot. It's not the system that failed. If he wasn't a dumb druggie. That's the message that they are passively putting out there. But Anna want to call other people right wingers. She is repeating. When I listen to this clip, CJ, I hear this shit my entire life. This is not even new shit. It's lazy, rebranded anti-homeless propaganda. But go ahead if they want to chime in.
Well, one more thing I just want to say is that a lot of times they don't want to go by the housing first model, because that means if everybody deserves housing intrinsically, then that means that the value of housing actually has to go down. And that's what it is, because they don't want their housing values to go down for the sacrifice of making sure that everyone is housed. And unfortunately, that's the mindset. It's more on profit instead of actually having the resource that everybody absolutely needs, that's housing.
I was going to say too, I think, Anna, they're in LA. I mean, it's not like some of these Hollywood executives and movie stars aren't doing drugs either at some of these Hollywood parties that they have. I don't even think it's about the drug issue. I think they just don't want to see homeless people. They don't want to walk past it. And I think that something that they need to remember to go back to is, why are people in that situation to begin with? California is one of the most expensive states to live in. A lot of people have been pushed out of their homes. I mean, it's not just California, though. I mean, Massachusetts, but even Austin, Texas has tent communities now. Like, a lot of people are just struggling to get by. So instead of blaming the people who are homeless, maybe you need to blame the system that's in place that has caused them to be in that situation. I did see that Los Angeles was trying to create like these sheds. This is like a new thing. They did this in Birmingham, Alabama as well. They've made these sheds for temporary housing for people who are homeless. And the idea is that they'll be there for a short time and then they'll transition into like their own permanent housing. But the transition for the most part hasn't been happening because the rent is too damn high. So this is a big part of the problem. Like, Mississippi found a solution to this problem. They said, we're just going to build more homes so that the homeless people have a place to live. That's really just build the homes.
Hold on. Here's my problem. Okay. I love you when you say, not you, Sebi, but I'm saying to just generally out there. I love when people say, oh, we just need to build more affordable housing. No, the hell we don't. We have way more housing stock than we do homeless people. Even if you count the people who are sleeping on the couch, even if you count the people who are sleeping in motels, we have way more housing stock. You just need to put people in them. That's all that really needs to be done. But the problem is, y'all don't want to put people in them because you want to keep the profits from that housing. So you just want to take the people who are homeless or in need of housing and put them in a special place, out of sight, out of mind. When really, we don't need to build housing. We already have it. The problem is that it's the greed. And so when people talk about, we just need to build affordable housing, plus affordable for who? That's the question. Affordable for who? Look, I'm going to tell you, what's the most affordable price for any human being is free. That's the most affordable price. But y'all don't want to hear that, because guess what? That means that you have to be at the same level, at least in some way, shape, or form, with people who you view as deplorable. That's what it is. It's a class issue, because there's some people, even who consider themselves middle class, who will look at the homeless and the poor as less than. And the thing is, here's the crazy part that people need to get through their minds. The homeless people are not better than you. They're not worse than you. And you're not better than them. And people need to get that through their heads.
But the other thing, too, I think in reference to affordable housing, when you say affordable for who, there are affordable housing apartments in Boston that are $4,000 a month. It's means tested. So you have to fit into a certain income bracket. If you make too little, you can't get into affordable housing. If you make too much, you can't get into affordable housing. And if you make too little, then you can apply for public housing. But those places have like 5-year wait lists for people to get in. And a lot of the public housing have rules too. I've interviewed people in those housing complex where they can't, certain things they can't do, certain people can't come over. Like it's just absolutely ridiculous. So I think, you have to remember Anna Kasparian's dad aren't they in like real estate? So I think like this.
I didn't know that. If she is,
this is something I was told that they're in real estate. And I think if you go back to a lot of like these real estate developers going back to 2008 during the housing crisis, one of the biggest mistakes that the United States allowed to happen, they allowed people like BlackRock and Vanguard to come in and buy up those homes that were foreclosed on. They flipped the houses and they raised the price of the house. And that's another thing that led to gentrification. It's not just about professionals moving into the neighborhood. It's about the fact that you have companies like BlackRock that are buying up these homes in these communities, and they're making it unaffordable for the people who grew up in those communities. So you have to go all the way to the top to companies like BlackRock, which own so much in the world, not just the United States, but in the world. If you don't knock them down, this is going to continue to be a problem.
And as some of us are Marxists, some are socialists, communists, whatever, but we have to begin to use the housing issue and the homeless, unhoused issue to illustrate use value and exchange value. So, because this is a great way of getting people to understand socialism here. The reason what JB is saying, and I can take this down, we can put Anna up if you want to hear more, but the reason JB is saying there's enough houses, there's more than this is why what's keeping them out is exchange value, which we want to get rid of. Use value would mean those homes would go to the people who don't have homes. That's the use of the house is the value. The home is made for a specific living person. Exchange value is why the homes are sitting open. Oh, that home's not just for anybody. That's for me to make money. That home is not for the use of a person. I built that to make profit.
Yeah.
And that's why they're sitting open with people without homes. The other thing I wanted to interject. So I just wanted to make sure we use housing to illustrate exchange value versus use value, so that people, because that's the basic thing people will understand as far as housing. That's a very basic, and I just thought of this just now. Maybe somebody thought of it before, but that's very basic. That's something I could take to like my mom and start a conversation with her about socialism. Because that's a basic understand. Oh, home, wow, yeah, that it is always a lot of homes that just empty. And it's just empty because they need money for them instead of it being made for a person. But back to the Anna video, and I wanted to make a point. I think Sabby was alluding to this. But if housing first, so the issue is she doesn't want them to have a house first and then put them in a treatment center for mental health or drugs. She's saying put them in a shelter first, like the housing. I don't understand why her position is against being housing first. Like, what does anybody know what that position is? She's saying mental health people should go to mental health institutions and not get a house, and she's saying people who are addicted to drugs should go to drugs facilities. Like, what is this this stance that if anybody knows?
Because she doesn't feel that they deserve it yet. That's what it is. She doesn't feel they deserve it. Because if you do drugs, you don't deserve housing, even though there are billionaires and billionaires that do drugs and have housing. If you have a mental illness, you don't deserve housing. That's basically, look, I'm trying to be very sympathetic, but I'm sorry. To her take and Ben Shapiro's take, I cannot be sympathetic to that. Because as somebody that was unhoused, even as a child, it's like, it's crazy to me. Because now you're not just talking to the people who may have mental illness, who some of them got it because they're unhoused. You're also talking about to the LGBTQ youth that were kicked out of their housing that have to stay on the streets because their parents rejected them. You're also talking about the kids that aged out of the system and now they're poor and homeless because they aged out of the system. Or you're also talking about the people who have 40% are employed, but yet they just can't afford it. And then what if they start doing drugs because they have to cope with the system, like Nick said? So the thing is that you believe that they just don't deserve it, or they have to go through these hoops in order to do it. But the crazy part is they actually go through the hoops a lot quicker if they have housing, more permanent housing. But the thing is not registering because they don't believe they deserve it, which means that they think that some humans are more deserving of a right, of an intrinsic right than others, which is this whole better than you type of mentality. And that's the problem. And that's the issue with capitalism in itself.
The other thing, too, is that I know Ben Shapiro said in that video that he left California or something like that. Okay, that's fine, but this is spreading. This problem is spreading. Like I said, Austin, Texas, having the same issue. Dallas, Texas, having the same issue. And CJ, I know you brought this up before. A lot of times these things start on the coast and then it moves inward. So we have the same problem on the East Coast with New York and Massachusetts. It starts here and then it kind of spreads because people will move further away from the expensive areas. But then once you start moving to those other towns and those other states, guess what? The rent in those areas will start to increase too. Look at like places like Florida, which used to be like if you're retiring, that used to be a haven for you to move to Florida because you don't have to worry about the taxes and everything. Now Florida is getting expensive. Same thing with places like Raleigh, North Carolina, because so many people left these expensive states and moved to those areas. Now those areas are becoming expensive. That's the problem that Ben Shapiro doesn't seem to understand. Just because you left California, that doesn't solve the problem. The problem is going to follow you because it continues to spread.
And these right-wingers, they ignore the massive poverty problem that is going on, not only throughout the entire country, but in red states in particular as well. You had a UN rapporteur who did a tour of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and he said the conditions that they are living in are worse than what they consider to be a third world country. He explained how many of them didn't have basic infrastructure like clean water. Many of them didn't have high-tech internet. And I don't live in a fancy area. I live in the Midwest. I live in a poor area of southern Kansas City. But I went to South Carolina when I was canvassing for Bernie, and I was in some rural areas, and I was shocked and appalled as someone who is not well-traveled. I'm not a well-traveled guy. So I went to South Carolina. I could not believe that my people was living like this because I was in these black neighborhoods, communities, no clean water, no cable. A lot of these people, I explained this when I was doing my reporting on the ground, had no idea who Bernie Sanders was because they didn't have cable news. They have internet. They living might as well be in the 1800s. But then people like Ben Shapiro, like, oh my God, look at these blue states. That's red, blue tribalism shit. Capitalism has failed whether it's red or blue, period. But I'll pass it to you guys and we can move on to the next topic. Let's have anything else.
I can do a couple of announcements and then Sabby has her topic.
This is fire because whenever I see this, is like the merging of the Nick and CJ show, then the Savvy and JB show is like a special. Nick and JB, Nick, JB, Savvy, man, this is dope. This is dope. But anyway,
yeah.
And Wonder Twins activate.
Savvy and JB on top, Nick and CJ at the bottom. Like it's the super show, I think.
I have a philosophical question as an intermission sort of question before we get to Savvy's topic, and we can start with Savvy. Do you see a realignment happening? We have sort of what they would call the far left, who are saying, hey, we need to reach out to Trump people, conservative people, and do more teaming up, worker kind of thing. And they call that red-brown alliance. But it seems to me, and the Yang Forward Party is illustrating this, along with Ro Khanna's willingness to vote for a Republican speaker. And now you're seeing this with Ben Shapiro and Anna Kasparian. It's like a realigning in the middle, too, where they're saying, hey, we are now NATO left, so we're down with a little bit of war. You're down with some nuclear energy for a little bit of climate change fix. Let's kind of, in the center, kind of realign. Have you noticed that, or do you have the sort of same assessment? I have that question for everybody to get me ready.
Anything to pull you away from the left. Anything to pull you away from the left. But also, I think some of it is for views. And this is a part of, like, let's be real, Anna trying to expand her audience as well. Could be same thing with Ben Shapiro, although his audience pretty big too. But I think that's a big part of it. But it don't make no sense to me, CJ, because again, like, why is it okay for Anna Kasparian to have a sit down conversation with Ben Shapiro, but it's not okay for Jimmy Dore to talk to Tucker Carlson? And by the way, it's not just Jimmy Dore that's gone on Tucker Carlson. Cornel West has also gone on Tucker Carlson's show, but you never hear people complain about that. They only complain about it when it's Jimmy Dore that goes on there.
And Nomiki Konst too.
Yep.
Yeah, he goes on there a lot. Yeah.